This video is about selecting a topic for your term paper. So selecting your topic, you need to consider your personal interests. What are you interested in relationship to social work practice, or the general topic that the course assignment is requiring you to write? You also have to take into consideration in terms of your personal interests. What are the expectations or requirements for the course assignment? So ask yourself, what do I already know about the topic that I'm interested in? The second question you want to ask yourself is, what do I want to know about the topic? Because obviously, while we may be interested in a particular topic, and we know a little bit about the topic, it's always important to realize that we could learn more. So again, take into consideration what is your interest in terms of social work practice. The other thing you want to take into consideration is, what are the critical issues in the field of social work or in relationship to a social problem that is being addressed, for example, in your field practicum site or your work environment in terms of social work. And then you also want to take into consideration what would be your way of contributing to the existing knowledge or the existing literature about the information, or how can you make it clearer and share the information, for example, with your colleagues or with other students in the MSW program. The other way in terms of selecting a topic is take into consideration reviewing, for example, titles and abstracts of journal articles that you've already identified in terms of your area of interest. Also take a look at your social work textbooks, what you've already been reading about in your various classes. And then you also want to stay abreast in terms of keeping up with current news. So, for example, reading the newspaper or watching the news, because they can provide really good ideas about a topic that you can write about for your term paper. Other considerations is considering the theoretical framework, our NASW Code of Ethics, as well as the Council on Social Work core competencies. Again, in relationship to the 9 core competencies in social work that's listed in our handbook. All right. And then another way to identify a topic to write about is brainstorming with other students. And this is where you can use the discussion board in terms of, or contacting fellow students and saying, hey, you know, what are you thinking about in terms of our course assignment? You can talk to your field practicum instructor. You can talk with your colleagues. Again, finding an area of interest for writing a paper. It's hard to do a literature review, for example, on a topic that you are not, totally invested in, and so you have to find that area of interest that'll help. Once you identify a topic, you've narrowed it down, then the next phase is searching for sources that is going to support what you write in your paper. Again, scholarly writing does require students to cite sources in their paper, because a scholarly paper cannot be opinion-based or just based on what you currently know, whether you're in the field or just your biases or your experiences in terms of social work practice, or your experience with a particular social problem or area of interest. So it's important to conduct a review of the literature, again, so that you can get new perspectives or ideas about the topic in our field of social work, or or a topic that you're somewhat already familiar with. There are two types of sources in terms of helping you write your term paper or writing a literature review. And they are primary sources and secondary sources of information. Again, this information will be found in the literature. We'll get to the literature review later, but I just want to talk primarily about how do you go about searching for the information in the literature. So the primary source is considered firsthand information. It's usually written by authors who conducted the original research. And so they're writing a journal article about their findings. The secondary resources that you would possibly read in journal articles are secondhand information. For example, you may have an author that is doing a meta-analysis of a bunch of other articles that they read. And so they're summarizing written work that somebody else has already done or has done, and they're citing those authors. So those would be considered secondary sources. So when searching for information in the literature, students really should focus primarily on the primary sources as much as possible. You want firsthand information, so authors that have actually conducted the research study or have done a lot of research on the topic in their writing seminal work or groundbreaking information. It's also important to find sources of information that are current. And I try to use, and this is, I think, more my standards, and so you want to ask your other professors as well. But when I talk about current, it's got to be sources that have been published within the last 10 years, unless the work is considered, again, seminal. Seminal means groundbreaking written information in the literature. So the search process is typically conducted online. You all, if this is your second year or you've had a couple of years in college, you're probably familiar with doing this kind of search online through the internet. And basically what happens is that we use search engines or what we call multidisciplinary databases. Multidisciplinary databases is like PsycInfo, ERIC, EBSCO, and of course there's more. Now, multidisciplinary databases will have thousands of informational sources, articles, periodicals, books, and other types of sources. And as a result, there's no way you can read all of that information that's available online. So what you have to do is narrow your search, and that's by using keywords and qualifiers. So keywords are basically 2 or 3 words, or they can be short phrases that are associated with a topic of interest, the topic that you want to research, all right? And qualifiers also helps to narrow the search for information, and that's by the type of publication, the name of the journal, for example, that you want to narrow on, or the range of dates for published information. And so let me give you an example. If you own a qualifier could be looking only for peer-reviewed journal articles. That would be a qualifier. Or you want to only look at journal articles that were published between the years 2009 through 2019. Again, that's narrowing your search, and the search engine will only then identify articles that were published in peer-reviewed journal articles that were published in 2009 through 2019. However, you want to be really careful that you're not being too prescriptive or too narrow, because you might end up not finding any articles. So again, don't only search, for example, in just social work journals. You might, depending on your topic, it might be advantageous of you to review articles that's also in psychology or sociology journals. So another way of narrowing the search is utilizing Boolean operators. And Boolean operators helps to define the relationship between two or more keywords or phrases. And let me give you an example. So after you do a search just on the topic, let's just say on self-care, okay? And then you do another separate search on about caregiver stress, okay? So those are two separate searches. Now you're thinking, okay, what if I try to see if I can combine the two? And so Boolean operators are words such as and, not, and the other word is or, okay? So and, not, and or are Boolean operators, okay? So let's use the word and as the Boolean operator. Oops, okay, lost my place here on my notes. You could look up, for example, self-care and caregiver stress. Okay, so the word and is in there as, so you're going to be able to, the search engine will then look for articles on self-care and self-compassion. Okay, so if you wanted to narrow it down, you could use the Boolean operator word not. Okay, so I'll give you an example. You could use the keyword self-care for caregivers, not self-care for animals. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but again, then you won't find all of these articles that are related to self-care for animals, okay? So the other Boolean operator is the word or. And so as an example, you could include the keywords self-care for social workers or self-compassion for caregivers, okay? So then it would look for, again, both of those. Now, once you've narrowed it down, the question then becomes, well, how many sources should I be looking for in terms of for my literature review or my term paper? And students often ask their instructors this question, you know, what's required, how many? Or the instructor might provide the minimum requirement, or they might give you the maximum. They don't want you to go over. And so you have to stay within those boundaries. When there is a requirement, this doesn't equate to the number of sources you're going to identify and find. It's important to identify more than what's required, all right? Because students may find that several of the articles you may not end up using it, and then you're going to fall short for what's required. Again, so it's always a good idea to consider identifying more to select from. So for example, if the requirement for the assignment is to include 10 peer-reviewed journal articles to cite in your term paper, it would be wise to identify 15 to 20 articles for you to review. Because out of those 15 to 20 articles, you might only be able to utilize 10, all right? Again, if you fall short, out of the 15 to 20, you would probably then have to go back into searching for additional articles. On the other hand, if there's no maximum number required, it's always, again, a good idea to identify more articles to select from. And again, make sure that you double check and read the instructions thoroughly about what your instructor is requiring in terms of the number of sources to review. All right, and that's a quick video lecture on selecting a topic and how to go about identifying sources in the literature.